Right, perfect. I'm going to get started. As people join, I will continue to admit them. So hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. This is being recorded. I already have it on recording. So if you have to duck out or you decide you don't want to watch it live, that's fine. I'll share the recording with you guys early next week. And just to get started, sorry, everyone's coming in now. I can't multitask. This is too much for my poor little sad brain. Right, so first of all, welcome to the How to Build a World-Class Campaign webinar. In 7 days, that's quite a big promise, isn't it? Yep. Are you guys looking forward to this? I am. I've really tried to build a framework and structure that I genuinely think is viable. So I'm going to talk you through kind of what a campaign entails and how we can actually go about doing something high quality in a very short space of time. So first and foremost, those of you that don't know me, maybe you've been on a mass webinar before, maybe you listen to our podcast. My name's Ashley Hinchcliffe. I am the Managing Director of Mass Marketing, and I have been working as a marketer in the learning technologies and vendor space for 13 years now. And I now run Mass Marketing nearly our 6th birthday on October 15th. We're an award-winning agency that focuses exclusively on enabling L&D and people functions to actually empower their employees, build awareness, build engagement with your fantastic learning product. So I guess if we want to summarize that into a TLDR, hopefully I know enough about campaigns to put you in good stead and tell you a little bit about where we should be getting started and what a good campaign should look like. So, Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams. What was that quote? Does anybody remember? You can unmute, you can shout it at me, you can put it in the chat. If you build it,
they will come.
Thank you, Karen. If you build it, they will come. How many of you in your organizations have been guilty of creating a learning product, a program, an experience of some kind, and made the assumption that it was good enough, that it would stand alone and people would come in their droves? Yes, that's the best thing I've ever created. They're gonna want to do learning. Karen agrees. Richard agrees. Yeah, we've all been guilty of it, haven't we? Great learning experiences. Great. We have a really fantastic product, but that is only one piece of the pie. So I kind of get a bit cross with Kevin Costner because I think it's a lie, and it puts us in a really bad place from the outset in terms of the attitude we have to our employees. We expect them to want to learn. And as a marketer, I know audiences don't necessarily want to do the things that we want them to. It's our job to kind of get them a little bit more involved and engaged. So building it, just want to tackle that off the outset. Building your product is not enough. We have to do marketing. We have to do campaigns. We have to do more to raise awareness of our learning experiences. People don't engage with initiatives just because they exist. It's quite obvious when you think about it. We're not building a baseball field for ghosts. Silence creates irrelevance. So building it and expecting people to just come isn't going to work ever, but especially not in L&D, because it's even more of a microcosm when we look at how busy and noisy organizations are as well. So I thought might be an interesting starting point is actually looking at our audiences, both externally, the experiences that they have, and then what also their experiences are like internally as well. So audiences in the wild, think about your people as consumers. What's going on for them? Think about yourself as a consumer. Overwhelmed with messages, right? My phone is perpetually on silent because I am in too many groups that are associated with my kids' school, and I get emails from my business account. I've got my personal emails. I get notifications from all my apps. I order too much stuff on Vinted. That sends me notifications, so on and so forth, right? And that's just on my Annie likes Vinted. It's the best. So this is just on my phone, right? Never mind the added distraction of my children shouting at me constantly and having a mountain of laundry to work through and being a business owner and so on and so forth. So there's a lot going on in everybody's lives. They're overwhelmed with messages. We're multitasking and doing many things at once and not remembering half of them. Does anyone else go into a room and forget what they went there for, or go up the stairs and forget what they went there for? Our brains are overloaded, right? We're doing too much at once. There's so much going on. The converse of that is we're actively consuming things that interest us, right? We spend time on our phones, even if that is doom scrolling on Instagram. We're still putting energy and time into things that interest us. For some people, it may be learning something new. It might be listening to the Headway app. It might be listening to their favorite podcast. It might be reading a book. We're still giving time and energy to things that interest us. Equally, we're completely ignoring stuff that we think is irrelevant. Do any of you really ever click on your Instagram ads, your Facebook ads? I don't know if people still go on Facebook, actually. You know, the ads that follow you around after you've been on a website shopping and suddenly that handbag that you've looked at is everywhere you go on the internet. You'll still ignore it if it doesn't feel relevant for you. We're making fast choices with a limited attention span, right? That's out in the wild, as it were, out in consumer land. Does anybody think that that experience is significantly different internally? No, I don't either. I think it's exactly the same. I think your people are still people. They're still overloaded with messages out in the wild, but then they have this extra layer of organizational noise, messages, hundreds of emails in a day, Teams chats, and thousands of messages on Slack, and so on and so forth, right? There is a level of organizational noise that I think people are tuning out, shall we say. We're also overworked, busy. There's been many, many cuts. A lot of us have employees that are doing more than their job currently the remit of their job used to be, maybe even a year ago. Again, they're still consuming stuff that interests them. Whether that's learning or not, they're still putting energy into things that they're interested in. That applies in the workplace and out of the workplace. They're ignoring things that they feel are irrelevant, and they're also making rapid choices. These are the same people, right? They are consumers. They are having the same experience, whether they're in the workplace or out of the workplace. All that's changing is the context. All that's really changing is the channels that we have available to hit these people, right? You can't create the targeted handbag ad that's going to follow them all around the web browser. We don't have those capabilities in-house in L&T. But we do still have a lot more channels than you think, right? But I'm going to show you how we can use different channels, but also how we can build a campaign that's really focused on treating our people like consumers. So, if you need further proof that marketing is kind of crucial, why do these big brands continue to do marketing? These are all household names. You will recognize every single one of them in a heartbeat, even the Kellogg's one, which doesn't even really have their brand there in the corner. The Heinz one. I don't know why as well. I looked at this like retrospectively and was like, why is everything red? But there we go. I don't know. I chose loads of red ads. And if you guys don't start singing the Christmas Coca-Cola song in your head as you're looking at that ad, then you're dead to me, because that is effective marketing. Holidays are coming, right? These brands are global, have a massive footprint, highly competitive, still do marketing because they know that they have to keep front of mind. They know that in order for an audience to really choose them over a competitor, they have to make sure that people remember who they are, what they stand for, what it is about their brand and their products that make them unique. So if it's the same audience and these big, massive brands are continuing to do marketing, even when they're incredibly well-known and highly consumed, why aren't we doing campaigns internally? Why are we doing the Kevin Costner? Why are we building good products, but doing nothing to make sure people are aware of where they are, how it benefits them, why it's in their interest to give time, energy, budget, whatever it might be, to upskilling themselves? It's an important question to consider because I don't think we often think about this as a mindset. It's quite a latent mindset that we don't always challenge in our own minds, that actually we have a product and we are trying to get consumers to use it at its basic level, right? There's a lot more to pedagogy and all of that learning science stuff in terms of the quality of the product and whether that changes behavior and impacts performance and affects business bottom lines in a positive way. But fundamentally, in order for all of that to happen, people need to know your product exists and they need to use it regularly. The only way to do that is through campaigns, like the holidays are coming. So what is a campaign? I want to unpick this a little bit because I have seen in my time every permutation of what a campaign is. So I'm going to talk through a little bit more about what I commonly see in L&D and what a campaign actually is. So firstly, my definition, a campaign is structured, goal-driven, and it comprises of a series of communications that is delivered consistently across multiple channels. So we're looking at multi-channel, multi-touch, designed to capture attention, build trust, and move towards a specific action, goal, or behavior. Very, very simple. Now, if I was to ask you guys at the beginning, how many of you tried learning campaigns, I reckon a good chunk of you would have put your hand up. But if we look at that definition, would you say yes now? That structure is not always there. That cadence isn't always there. In other words, it's not just one interaction. It's not one email. It's not one poster. It's not one slide on your global all hands call or your town hall. It's a planned sequence, right? It should be a drumbeat, a hum, a consistent cadence of release, not that single big symbol, and then you disappear. So this is what we do. I see it every year, Learning at Work Week. Wow, we do love a Learning at Work Week, don't we? It's a great way to get people engaged with learning. It's a fantastic idea. I don't have an issue with Learning at Work Week. What I have an issue with is we do 1 week of it. So we put a lot of energy all of a sudden into getting people really connected with learning and doing lots of promotion and lunch and learns and drop-in events and all sorts of stuff. And then we do that for a week and then we just fall off the face of the earth and all of that energy just drops off a cliff. Conversely, I also see a lot when we are launching new programs and products like like LMS or LXP. We do these big bang, this thing is here, boom, and then silence again. So we're quite good, I think, at these very hyper-focused short-term bursts of activity where we understand, okay, we've got something that we're trying to promote. We might still do it last minute. We don't always have that plan aspect to it, but we do have, especially with Learning at Work Week, it captivates us, but we do tend to have a bit more focus and structure around that in particular. But it's still very short-lived. They don't tend to last very long. And so what happens is this very, very, very sophisticated graph that I made here. It's super fancy. But what you can see is just one simple peak of activity. We go from being really quiet to making a lot of noise, and then we go back to being really quiet again. The way people's brains work is they need to see things over and over again in order for it to create some level of permanence in their memory. That's why brands like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, KFC, Apple still advertise, even though their products are universally used, pretty much. Because they know that they can't just do these small bursts of activity because it will just drop off people's radars and memories overnight, right? So what we need to be focusing on is more of a hum, more of a drumbeat, more of a cadence, a bit of structure and consistency. So maybe it's not always at 100% noise, but there's always some level of noise. I'm going to use noise. It has a bit of a pejorative word to it, but I don't think it's a negative word in the context I'm trying to say it, right? We do want to be noisy in a constructive way. We want to disrupt, right? We want to positively disrupt. We want to get people's attention. And the only way to do that is by being noisy in what is already a very noisy place, right? How does my child get my attention when I'm talking? He shouts louder. Does he get my attention? Yes, he does. And then I tell him to stop. So what we need is structure, cadence, consistency, right? These are the things that I often see lacking in campaigns that are created internally. So we might do a few little things, but we're not doing it over a period of time. When I create bespoke campaigns for our clients and we're doing, say, a campaign of like 6, 12 months or whatever it might be, we're looking at creating 60, 65 assets maybe. And you share that with them and they're like, that's a lot of assets. And you have to kind of explain, yeah, but not everybody's going to see every single thing we put out. Not everybody's going to engage with every single piece of content. So it is as much as a numbers game as anything else, right? But that's why we need to consistently show up over a prolonged period of time rather than these short bursts of activity. Because otherwise we just have no chance to ever be memorable. So from a marketer's perspective, this is what I believe are the fundamentals of a campaign. A campaign should always start with a clearly defined goal. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What are we doing this for? Oh, more engagement doesn't help, not helpful, right? We need to be very clear what that goal is and how we're going to accomplish it. We also need a target audience. All employees is not adequate. That doesn't give us a huge amount of information. So what we want to be looking at is, again, building out personas, and I'll talk through a little bit more about that further in the deck. Understanding our audience segments better and how we can create some resonance. There may be occasions where we are targeting all your employees, but there still should be some segmentation within your communications, targeting your distinct personas. We also need a strategy. Now, I must admit, I'm yet to see a single strategy with anybody I've ever talked to, like a proper strategy. There might be like a one-pager of some ideas of things that we might do and this, that, and the other, but a proper strategy, taglines, messaging framework. What are we doing? What's competing for people's attention right now? What's the market? What's going on in the organization? When we do discovery work, we ask a lot about the organizational culture because that's the market you're hitting in. So if there's a lot of change, a lot of a recent acquisition, if there's upcoming redundancies, all of this creates a climate that you need to be aware of in terms of how you're marketing things, right? And then, as I alluded to earlier, it should be multi-channel and multi-touch. So we need to be using different places and spaces to be visible and present over a period of time. And again, a plan, structure. Why are we doing this? How are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? Who's going to own it? Who's going to create it? Who's going to release it? When is it going to be released? And have that overview over everything. Because again, I don't know if you guys would concur, but in my experience, if things aren't owned, they tend to fall by the wayside. So a plan adds that rigor and allows you to have that kind of crucial structure. I know what you're thinking. We started this by saying, this is a campaign in a week. How does she expect me to build a strategy and a target audience and assets and a plan in a whole week? I can see it in your faces. This is what you're saying, isn't it? Ain't nobody got time for that. And I would encourage you to make time, right? So I have broken down what I think you can and should do for 1 week, well, 7 days. So 1 week, not a business week, but I'm sure you'll let me go on that one, right? So let me talk through. We're going to go on a little journey about Campaign Bootcamp. Okay, this is everything you can do. You can do this yourself. You do not need me to do this, right? Building a campaign in 7 days sounds obnoxious, even reading it. I promise you, if we break it down, it's not as daunting as it looks, okay? This is a bootstrapped campaign. So there are a few things. There's a bit of a cheat, sorry. We started well. There are a few things I would highly recommend you have in advance of starting this work because it will lay a really strong foundation for everything you do subsequently. So if you haven't already, undertake some focus groups with your audience, right? I spoke to someone at Learning Live and they were telling me that they'd created their personas, but they were struggling to get them well-rounded. And I said, well, have you spoken to your audience? And they said, oh, no. We need to hear these people's voices. We need to hear it directly from them in terms of what is actually going on. And whilst focus groups, you can we aim somewhere between 8 and 10 people, 8 and 12 maybe. That's still going to give you something, right? That's only 50 people, but it's going to give you a good view of what's going on. It's better than a big fat zero, right? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec as well. You need to pick the dates that you're going to do the campaign as well. Early doors, right? This is the planning stage, because in my experience, internal comms have a lot to say about the work that we do when it comes to marketing for L&D. You need to know what they've got planned. You need to get them on board. You need to understand if there's a CEO email going out next Friday, you're not going to be able to do anything because they'll just tell you no. That is the end of that. So I would suggest a campaign lasts at least 3 months, anywhere between 3 months and 12, really, depending on your objective and what it is that you're trying to achieve, but also perhaps how obstinate your audience is and, really kind of where you think you are. So perhaps some of your focus group work could guide that. And then I know it's ambitious, but I'm telling you to clear your calendar for at least 3 days, no meetings, so that you can give this genuine energy and really focus. Probably 4 days, actually. Okay. And change the days around a little bit. So actually 4. So let's look at what that looks like, right? Focus groups. I ask the same types of questions to every focus group that I do so that I have some comparative data. Most of the time when I see learning folk doing this, they focus on like, well, what's your opinion of learning? And like, do you know where learning is? And do you know, have you heard of our LXP or LMS and it's called this? And, did you know we have this, that, and the other? You can ask a little bit of that. But I would really strongly suggest that you look at more about the organizational culture, their lived experience as employees. And again, try and speak to a good cross-section of people so that you get that representation geographically, but also by role, even tenure. Also, someone who's been there 20 years versus someone who's been there 6 months is probably going to have a really different perspective. Again, you can talk to them a bit about what they know about L&D. The one I always start with, because people have a lot to say about it, what is their main pain point at work? What's grinding their gears? What is pissing them off? I promise you, they will have some things to say. The most effective marketing in the world solves problems. So if you can understand people's pain points from the outset, it's going to give you some really clear indication in terms of your messaging, how you should maybe position your campaign. And also what's motivating them. Why do they come to work? It's probably a paycheck. But again, understanding that relationship that the organization has with the employee is really important. So this just gives you immediately, you can see how much more breadth and depth you're going to get from a conversation like this than tell me what you know about the learning offering and, how often do you learn and things like that. It's not useless information, but when we look at marketing, this information is much more crucial, in my opinion. And as I said, I really recommend you build a persona. Now, I could probably talk for at least half a day on how to create personas. So I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty and the minutiae of that. I would highly recommend, and I will put this in a follow-up email. I'll put the link. So if you don't want to scan them on your phone or whatever now, that's fine. But we have an ebook on how to create personas. There's a webinar on how to create personas. And Hannah also did a really wonderful vlog where she essentially walks you through what she's done with interviews with one of our clients, how she disseminates the data and how she turns that into something meaningful from a personas perspective. So if you're interested in building that skill, I would highly recommend those 3 resources. They're all free, so it's not as if you have to do anything additional. So once we've got those 3 things sorted, we've got our focus groups and a basic persona. We've got some dates that we want to run our campaign for, and we've cleared our diary so that we can actually dedicate some time to this rather than what I often see, it's hooked on the end of something, right? We add it as an afterthought. It's a bit, not really considered until after the fact. So let's make sure that we build this in. Okay, day 1 and 2. What we're going to start with is our strategy. Okay, again, as I said at the beginning, we want to be able to define our campaign goal from the outset. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Because if we don't know that, we're going to become pretty orless pretty quickly, right? Like rudderless is probably what I meant to say there, but you know what I mean anyways, right? We won't have a very clear direction if we don't know what our goal is. And again, I don't see this often considered. You've got a persona, so you should create a value proposition canvas. And again, I'll show you what that looks like in one of the next slides. Brainstorming taglines. Again, taglines are really important. They give you that hook. They give you a way to bring what it is you're trying to say to life. You should have a good idea of what that would look like based on the persona and the research that you've done. But again, I'll give you some ideas and ways that you can maybe do that. And then I suggest drafting a strategy, right? Actually being clear about what it is we're trying to do, who we're targeting, what our goal is, what channels we're going to use. And again, you see there, I've said only do 3 channels. You probably don't have too many more than that. If you think about it, you actually have a lot more, but I would suggest keeping it narrow on the amount of channels that you have. And that's for namely a resource reason, because the more channels that you have, the more time it takes to develop the assets and also run the campaign itself. So Mass is a very lean organization. We don't do much besides LinkedIn, because if we started doing LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and X, like suddenly social media management becomes a full-time job rather than something we do because we like it, really. But you get my point, right? So you're diluting the resource and the time that you have if you spread yourselves too thin. And I think it becomes unaccomplishable. So again, based on my experiences, I would recommend email, because email still can be fantastic if we focus on things like subject lines and optimizing our subject lines, considering more about how we get people to open our emails and what we want them to do when they've opened the email. One of my favorite copywriting tips is just get them to read the first line and then the next line and then the next line, right? So we, again, need to think about how we hook people in. So that is not a medium we should ignore at all. Just because it's busy doesn't mean it's not worth doing. How many emails do you get in your personal email every day? You still open some of them. Tangible assets. So again, office spaces, posters, screens, these are places we can do video. These are places we know people sit around and chat and are around, and therefore it is a good place. There's some captive audiences there. They're maybe taking a break from the screens and a breather from their desk. So again, one-pagers, little brochures, informational postcards, that sort of things. And then your intranet/social media, if you've got Aviva Engage or you've got the charming SharePoint, there's still usually something in place where you can have some sort of more casual discourse with your employees. But again, picking these things in advance informs the next stages, which is obviously creating your assets. So let's start with goals. I've seen all of these, by the way. We want measurable, specific goals. So we don't want things that are vague or activity focused. Make people more engaged with learning. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? What does more engaged mean? More visits to the LMS, more completions, so on and so forth. So you can see straight away that that's impossible for us to measure for a start. Like, there's just no way for us to promote a learning culture. How do you go and talk to the C-suite about how you promoted a learning culture? There's nothing measurable there, right? So when we start with looking at our goals, make sure that your goals actually look a little bit more like this. Specific, measurable. I mean, if you've heard of SMART, then you'll know what I'm talking about. I didn't want to get that up because I know it's the bane of many people's lives. So I didn't want to talk through SMART goals. But focus on behavior change, focus on business impact, increasing completion rates, 70% awareness of a new learning brand. Imagine if you rolled out a brand and you actually surveyed people, in the first month, how much do they know about it? Do they recognize the name? One question, do you recognize this name? No, whatever. Ask them again in 6 months. It's such an easy barometer to see if what you're doing is actually penetrating. Click-through rates, again, depending on the technology you have available, measuring the success of your email marketing and your socials. Again, hopefully with the campaign efforts, that should slowly start to climb. These are all measurable. They're very granular and they're very, very clear. So again, if we want to move away from boost learner engagement, right, and more towards these very clear, measurable goals. Once we've defined our goal, again, some of you may, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll have heard me talk about the Value Prop Canvas in the past. This is a really useful tool. I actually came across it when Mass was on a business accelerator course. And so it's typically used for business modeling and actually planning your products and how you can take your products to market. So you can clearly see why I thought it might be useful for our context. So I've adapted it ever so slightly. But what we want to be doing in this, and I'd encourage you to have a meeting, a value prop meeting for a couple of hours with your core L&D team and do a value prop canvas. Actually work through your products and services. What is it that we offer? Break it down entirely. Have that conversation. What are we giving people? What is it? What do they benefit from that? What are the gain creators, right? That's the what's in it for me piece. What are the pain relievers? Again, when I talked about the most effective campaigns are about solving people's problems, how does your learning do that for your employees? If we can't answer these questions, we're never going to have really effective comms in our marketing, because it's always going to be, hey, there's a new thing here. I think you should go check it out because it's great. It's not enough. It's just going to get ignored, right? The other side of that chart is your audience, right? So again, you've done your persona work. You have some data. You have your focus groups. What do they need in order to be at work, but also learn, right? Psychological safety, manager buy-in, leadership support, clarity on their role and duties, so on and so forth. What do they want as an employee? Do they want career progression? Do they want stability? Do they want, again, clarity on their role? Sometimes there's overlap on these things. And again, they're pain points. So we've got pain relievers. What pain does your product relieve? And what pain do they have? Where are the overlaps? And some of this absolutely will have come out in your focus groups. So if you don't do the focus groups, this will become harder because you're at least doing the right-hand side based on assumptions. And I wouldn't recommend doing that because you'll just get yourself into a bit of a L&D echo chamber where you think you know what your audience wants and needs. And they're surprisingly mercurial, and you know, it's useful having conversations with people because they rarely behave and think in the way we think that they do. So anyways, if you want to learn more about the value prop, again, QR code, but I'll put it in the email as well. There's quite a detailed blog on how to conduct that work and do that. So if you are sat at your desk, I want to just do a little mini task because obviously I mentioned taglines, right? If you've got pen and paper, participate with me. You can come off mute when I ask you to, or you can put something in the chat if you want to. I want you guys to just spend a minute or two thinking about the most cliched, trite corporate tagline you can think of for a learning campaign, or things that you've seen in previous organizations and thought, oh, that's a bit cheesy. That's a bit corny, that. Transforming the way we work together. It just sounds a bit corny, right? Have a think about something that comes to mind that sounds particularly cheesy, overdone, cliched. I'm just going to be quiet because I know you can't think whilst I'm talking. I'll give you a minute or two and I will have a drink. Kinga, just do it. Do you know what though, right? This crossed my mind the other day because I actually was talking to somebody about compliance training, and I thought, could you do a campaign around just do it? Like, it is something you just gotta do. We need you. I think it could work. Yes, you can. That sounds very, I can't remember what Obama's tagline was. Was it yes, we can? It's fair. Yeah, overdone for sure. Make it go away. Accelerating our culture, Emily, it just is a lot of buzzwords, right? Let's make it great again. The ultimate training, leveling up. Great. Okay. These are great, right? You can see how these all feel a little bit corny straight away. Now, here's some examples. What I'm going to ask you to do is flip those on their head. I've done a few. Empowering people to reach their full potential. Maybe something a little bit more assertive, something quick, snappy. Learn it today, use it tomorrow. Transforming the way we work together, work smarter together. So on and so forth. So could we look at some of those ones? Grow for growth? Yeah. Could we flip some of these on their head? Let's make it great again. Make yourself great. What would be people's motivators? How could we make these less cliched? Could we move away from some of the corporate jargon? Kinga, if you were muted, do you want to speak? Oh, no. No. So I want you to think again, this is a good exercise because sometimes a big part of marketing is almost knowing what doesn't work. So like, for example, when you do A/B testing and stuff, learning what doesn't work is actually a bigger piece of the pie than what does work. So when we're building out campaigns and looking at taglines and you're brainstorming with your team, do this exercise. Dump every single tagline you could think of for a campaign, and let's pull out the ones that maybe have some potential, but then rework them. Move them away from the trite, move them away from the cliche, the corporate jargon, make them human. Where's the action? Where's the urgency? Where's the hook? And then I would suggest that even if you do this yourself, get something picked quickly. So we're very, very good at navel gazing. We're very good at meeting after meeting after meeting. Yeah, but does this work? Yeah, but we have to get brand involved, and then we've got to get the EVP involved, and does it align with our values and this, that, and the other? Rapid deployment, quick and dirty. Sometimes doing is better than not doing, right? So get a few good ones and get your team together and pick one and stick by it. Try it out. If it doesn't work, you've learned something really important. But just bimbling about and talking about it isn't going to kind of really get you anywhere. So don't have meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And then draft a strategy based on that work, right? As I said before, get your 3 channels defined. No more, or you are going to overwhelm yourself, right? All right, back into the asset creation. So this is really important. I highly recommend creating all your assets in advance. So it sounds like counterintuitive, but some of the most effective campaigns I've ever done, I've built the entire campaign in advance from an assets perspective. Maybe not copy, but definitely assets. And that's enabled me to then focus on deployment and engagement with my audiences in real time. So my time isn't spent building the campaign itself. It's actually being in the campaign and getting people to kind of interact with it, responding to comments on my social platforms, measuring and tracking and iterating, testing and evolving. So if you create your assets in advance, it frees up your time actually when the campaign is being deployed. So I would highly recommend that. For those of you that aren't familiar with the ADL model, this is a funnel that's very famous in marketing. We do like an upside down triangle in marketing, but this is essentially what stage of awareness people are at. So when people are considering buying products, they go from not really knowing you at all to taking action, buying the thing, and then maybe potentially becoming an advocate and being quite loyal to your brand. Most of our employees are sat firmly in that awareness stage. And again, you'll probably find that when you do your focus groups. Most people don't really know where to go for learning, what's available to them, how it pertains to their role, where's the relevancy, where's the context, I'm too busy. So you're probably got most of your audience sitting in that awareness stage. I can probably safely assume that based on the extensive research we've done. Most people are sat up that top area. So consider that when you're building your assets. When you're writing an email, does Bob, who's never really heard of you guys, and even though he's worked at the company for 3.5 years, he's still shocked that there's, wow, a whole wealth of learning I didn't even know was here. I honestly have these conversations, right? So how would you talk to him versus Jane, who's been at your organization for 15 years, but has been on a manager program and is now on part of a leadership program and is quite au fait with what's available to her because she's partaken in things. You can see immediately how you might communicate with those audiences differently. So we kind of go straight to the action phase when we do our comms and L&D. Here's the thing, go and do it. So we've skipped all these other steps where they don't really know about us. They're not really interested. They have no real desire to engage. We've missed all those integral steps. We just go straight to the action. Go into this course, join this program, sign up here, go to the LXP. So we're missing some really fundamental steps in terms of educating our audiences and helping them actually understand that what's in it for me and the benefits for them. So I'd highly recommend the ADL model and really focusing on that awareness stage within your campaigns, because I can safely say you'll probably hit the majority of your audience with those. In terms of creating assets, if you're looking at a 3-month campaign, this is minimum viable product, by the way. I would obviously say you do as many as is reasonable or possible, even if it was 2 emails a month or 2 social posts a month, but minimum viable product for a multi-touch campaign that spans several months. You're looking at least one email a month, focused on the funnel stage that you're targeting, bearing in mind your persona and the what's in it for me. So you can see how everything builds on everything else, right? We've done all of that initial baseline work around getting our research and our audiences together, carving out real time for the campaign, knowing when we're going to release stuff. And that allows us to then really start to answer some of these messaging and granular questions around what is going to make people open that email? What is going to, is it the time of year? If you're going to roll out around Christmas time, is that going to have an impact on what you say and how you do it? I wouldn't recommend doing any campaign around Christmas time, just as a side note. 3 social media posts, again, once a month at least. So you can see already if we've got 3 emails, we could do 1 email, and then in 2 weeks' time, we could do a social media post, and then in 2 weeks' time, we could do another email, so on and so forth. So you can see how we can already create a small amount of cadence just based off that. Images. I don't know if you guys use Canva. If you don't, please start. It is one of my favorite marketing tools because it is so easy to use. It is so accessible, and it is so low cost for what it does. They don't pay me to say this. They probably should at this stage because I've been touting how mint they are for the whole time I've been running Mass. Because when I used to be an in-house marketer, I used to have to go to a graphic designer to get imagery made, and that added insane amounts of lag time. 3-4 days just to get a simple image I wanted to put on my socials. And sometimes you need to be reactive and move quickly, and having your ability. Aisha knows, she loves Canva. It's fantastic. You can resize easily. You can put all your brand imagery in there. You can put your colors in there, typography, so you're not getting any Frankenstein branding. You can create templates and share them with your team if you really want to lock things down, so on and so forth. But you need some imagery. You need some visuals, right? You need something to enliven people. And then I would at least recommend a poster. And again, maybe repurpose it, or maybe do one landscape and one my brain's just had a complete brain fart as to what the opposite of landscape is. You know what I mean? Vertical, I don't know. Change the message, change the image. That's it. You don't need to do much else. You can have a similar layout, change the color, something so it looks different, but you haven't had. Thank you, Portrait. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate you. You're a superstar. Not all heroes wear capes. So that would be my minimum viable product in terms of campaign assets, right? We're talking lean here. So it's not too much to do. And I just wanted to show you some examples of the types of things we've done for clients in the past. You can see, so for example, for a Starbucks here, we came up with a tagline of get your fill of learning. It was all very self-serve. So it was kind of like, what's in your cup? You can take as much or as little as you want. Do you want the espresso, or do you want the grande latte, whatever? Again, we came up with a whole kind of match tagline with Booking.com. Own It was with ING Bank again. So we again did all that research, but took the time to really understand what was going to create resonance with each of those audiences. And if I showed you the whole breadth and depth of assets, you would see that the hook and the tagline sits around it, but the messaging isn't the same in everything, right? We're not necessarily saying on like the Starbucks one, you can see get your fill of learning, but it's much smaller. So it's still there, but we've worked on that theme of get your fill of learning and built on that. And so created messaging frameworks that tie back into that main theme, but you're not just repeating the same words in the same message over and over, because people will just tune that out, right? So we need to really work on how we can present a consistent idea differently. So just wanted to show those as a little bit of kind of inspiration and motivation. I do have some no-nos for you when it comes to your imagery. Now, pardon my French, but let's just stop using the stock photography with people looking at screens and, the person who's got the sticky notes on the glass wall in the office and they're looking at that. They're so overdone now that people, again, ignore it because they feel like they've seen all of that imagery before. So just stop using that type of stock photography. There's, AI capability for imagery now is good, right? We can create different types of imagery that don't necessarily need to be stock in the truest sense of the word, especially internally. You don't need so much to worry about corporate sign off. You also don't need to worry about any licensing or anything like that. Let's avoid those cliche taglines, right? Let's not go there. We don't need them. Let's not use those beautiful metaphors that we see, like light bulbs for ideas, puzzle pieces for teamwork. mountain climbers for success. These are all things I've seen us do. And again, they just feel very, very cliched. A lot of you guys may be working in PowerPoint. Again, I've seen many people creating images in PowerPoint because, again, they don't necessarily have access to Canva, and that is somewhat more of a flexible tool than nothing. But again, generic icons, overused infographics. Think about how common things are being seen. And if you've seen it before and it looks familiar to you, guaranteed your audience will feel the same and they're going to ignore it as well. We don't want tons of posters with just thousands of words on them. You know, let's look back at these examples, right? White space is important. Let the pictures speak with the tagline. So, you know, don't just put words and words and words and words. And again, don't use jargon. These people are human beings, right? They're the consumers I showed you at the beginning. They're out in the wild. Synergy, enablement, optimization. Blech. It's all very, very corporate and very jargony, and no one is interested. So I would highly recommend when you're writing your copy, when you're building your imagery, that you take some of that on board. Look at that, we're only in day 4. Feels like we've done a lot, right? But it's not that much. If you break it down and you allocate this time, you're fine, I promise. So now we're going to be looking at planning, right? So you've got your assets, you've got your persona, you've got the dates that you're going to do this. So what we want to then do is, okay, I've got my 3 emails, I've got my 3 social posts, I've got a poster. Where am I going to put these things and when am I going to put them out? So you want to map your assets across the 3 months. You want to focus on ensuring it's multi-channel, consistent, timely releases, focus on how you can keep content fresh. Like I said, sometimes you can just change the picture or change the color, change the wording, not much else. You know, people forget easily. You can repurpose and reuse stuff as well because people do forget. Campaign plans take on many, many forms, but usually they're just some form of giant spreadsheet. So some are really more simple and basic, like this one over here. Others are incredibly granular. Something for what you're doing can be quite simple, but make sure you have when it's due, who's owning it, right? And when you're going to release it so that you have some clear structure. And if you have time, think about, again, where you could build in face-to-face interactions. I was just having a call with a client today, and a lot of their employees are based out in kind of warehouses and manufacturing environments. So face-to-face stuff is really important for them. So again, how can you supplement that? How can you add that human touch? We want to be in as many places as possible, right? And do not, and I mean this, do not forget your managers. This is a separate audience that you need to activate. They make or break learning. They give tacit permission as to whether people can have time to learn. They're the ones who are having the one-to-ones and their weekly stand-ups and so on and so forth. Think about how you can educate them on learning. Think about how you can enable them to have effective cascades. How can you market to them so that they can market for you, right? So treat them as a slightly different audience. I think sometimes we overlook the managers, but they're really important. And then the last 2 days are much easier, right? Circulate with the important people, the people who are going to have something to say about it all. Get the feedback, iterate, evolve it, make amends at where possible. Bear in mind, these people aren't marketers. You're following a clear framework. So take their feedback, but don't necessarily implement it if it doesn't make sense or harms the integrity of the campaign from a structure and cadence perspective. But we have to circulate. We have to get sign off. We have to get approval. This is an important step. And then our last 2 days, final checks. Check for things like accessibility, right? Fonts on certain colors. You know, we don't want white fonts on pale blue. Like if I changed that to white, it'd be much more illegible. So think about accessibility. Try and stick to WCAG standards 2.2, I think it is now. See where you can personalize it. And as I said earlier, have a project manager, have a team of people that are going to be doing whatever they're doing, making sure they're aware of what they're doing, because if no one owns this, it will die. You'll send out one email and then nothing will happen from there. And don't put all that work in to plan this and then let it fall down at the last minute. So this is a really important part of your planning. And then, woohoo! Success, miraculous. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yay, launch. That's the truth, right? I know. No, Annie, no. It's the truth though, right? I know you guys aren't going to be able to block out a week. You're going to get pulled into meetings that are essential. That could have been an email. You're going to get someone from an SME somewhere telling you they absolutely need a new e-learning module yesterday on X, Y, or Z, or just a new resource, maybe just a PDF, something like that. It's not possible to necessarily carve out that sort of time because it is kind of true. Ain't nobody got time for that. But guess what? I have a solution. So I don't know if you guys have heard. As I've said to you, you can do this yourself. It is a time thing more than anything else, right? I've created a campaign in a box, which is essentially an off-the-shelf campaign solution that is entirely customizable. So it comes with Canva templates. I'll show you everything that's in it. But essentially, this gives you everything that I've just discussed, wrapped up with a lovely little bow. So all you have to do is literally assign tasks and structure it out and get the sign off, essentially. So let me show you a little bit about it. It's an off-the-shelf campaign, so we have only our first edition at the moment, which is around learner re-engagement, reactivating audiences, really making people aware of your learning. That comes with a full 3-month campaign strategy and weekly release plan. The strategy is 12 pages long, so it's quite hefty. It's got a range of copy and paste emails and social posts. We've adopted a very kind of human, candid tone of voice, but of course you can tailor that to your company tone of voice if you need to. It also comes with a range of customizable images in the form of posters, LMS banners, social images, email imagery, PDFs, and more. And again, those all come in Canva. They're in template form. So again, if you need to make them on brand, change your font colors, change your photography or iconography or typography, I've said many ographies there, you can do all that with just a couple of clicks. We've done the formatting, we've laid things out, we've put the messaging in there. You just need to change the colors and the pictures. There's also a manager activation kit in there, which is really focused on specifically targeting that audience, showing them why you're doing what you're doing with a kind of educational one-pager, but also a series of nudges that you can send to them over the period of 3 months to enable you to continue to activate them and support them in having those conversations. Then there's lots of other stuff around engagement tools and pitching internally, also like campaign success slides, planning templates. There's also benchmarking tools in there. There's an accessibility checklist as well. Lorna, I'll show you a few examples of the assets. If you want a demo and you want to see everything properly, I'll point you to that at the end. But it's everything you need. And you can launch this within a week. If you have sign off, within a week. So this is just a small example of some of the assets. So as I said, we've kind of adopted a look and feel that's very neutral, but we've kind of focused on this advancing forward. And if you were to buy it and saw the tagline, you'd understand why that makes sense. But this is all customizable in Canva, so you can just drag and change that image. You can put your logo there. You can change the color of the font and change the type of font that's there, so on and so forth. You've got a campaign plan, how to not annoy busy managers, top tips mini guide that goes in that activation kit, one-pagers, social media posts, so on and so forth. So there's a lot more there than I've just shown here, but it gives you an example of how it's structured and how it's laid out. And that is it. Marketing magic in a matter of clicks. So if you want a bit more info, that QR code just takes you to the campaign in a box page itself. But if you want a demo, just fill in the form at the bottom of the page and I'll be in touch and I can just hop on a call with you and show you it in a little bit more detail and show you how it works. Essentially, it is a zip file that we send to you. It is that straightforward. It is that structured. So it's very simple to get. So yeah, thank you so much. I know that that's a lot to take in, and I do feel like I've talked literally at you for an hour, but these things don't take forever, right? We need to focus on strategy, structure, and a little bit of guts, to be honest. You got 7 days. You can do it. And again, like I said, you don't need me. You don't necessarily need maths to do this. If you're time poor, campaign in a box is great, but if you have the time to do this yourself, you can. So that is the end of my chat. We do have a few minutes for, I mean, I can stay a little bit later, but does anyone have any questions or anything? I'll stop sharing. You can just unmute if you want, or you can put it in chat. No questions. All right. That was just hopefully overload. I hope that that's inspired you guys anyways to think about how we do campaigns internally, but also maybe how we're sometimes falling short in terms of that structure piece and that cadence and that consistency. We don't want that cymbal crash, right? We want that that cadence, that hum. So if you don't have any questions for me, I just want to say thank you for sticking with me for the whole hour. Thanks so much for your time. I will share the recording and anything that I've mentioned resource-wise and links and whatnot in the email that I send next week as a follow-up. Thank you so much for your time, guys.